That process again, level 0, the reason why we don't have level 0 in our slider is really because level 0 represents the original mesh. And if we say level 0, let's take a look at what happens. 0. We'll see that we get an orange component, but it will still pass through it the mesh. Okay, so if I copy this over to here, bring my mesh back out, this would be the output, which is the subdivided mesh, right? Subdivision surface, whatever you want to call it, is a subdivided mesh. Okay, so this is really the process, and it looks a little pared down, I guess you could say. There's not a whole lot going on here, but that's part of the reason why it's so interesting, is that you have something really quite simple, like a mesh primitive, subdivision, and then a subdivided version of the original mesh primitive. Now, if I go back here to Rhino, and I turn on, let's say, click my mesh edge, click my mesh edge, and I go ahead and move these up now, you can see that the smoothing, right, is really quite fast, as well as allows you to do some pretty interesting stuff without having to do a whole lot in terms of the modeling. Now, a couple things to note. Let's go back over to our mesh, polygon mesh primitives plane. I'm going to increase the number of faces that I have, and I'm going to draw a mesh plane again. If I enter this mesh plane, you'll see that I have a lot more faces now because I started with a lot more faces. If, for instance, I begin to manipulate elements of this mesh, you'll see that we're going to get a lot more change going on here because we have a lot more data, right? We have a lot more faces, and therefore we're going to have a lot more to work with whenever we start to smooth, right? If I start moving, edges back down, right? If, for instance, I pick a vertex, move it up, you're going to see you're going to be able to deform this quite a lot more than you would be able to if you were just using a 3x3 primitive. However, we are going to stick with our 3x3 primitive just to be able to ensure that we can understand fully kind of the power of subdivision modeling, given something as simple as just this kind of basic element. Now, let's take a look at a couple things. If, for instance, I make a copy of this guy, just take my mesh primitive over to here, and using Control-Shift, I select a face and delete it. One thing that's really interesting about meshes is that because the mesh does not have a UV space, right, like a surface, you can do things like delete faces, creating holes, and then I'm going to set this into my input mesh primitive. And the subdivision mesh will actually be able to continue to construct a continuous subdivided mesh. And that's really quite interesting and a huge benefit to us, because that means that we can also take something as simple as this component. I'm going to make another copy and start to elaborate a little bit on its design. Now, let's take a look then at, sorry about that, how to go ahead and refine our component just a little bit, our mesh primitive. I'm going to close Grasshopper momentarily, and I'm going to come over here into Rhino. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my component, and in the right view, I'm just going to use transform mirror. I'm just going to mirror this right down. Now in doing so, you'll see that the component is now made up of multiple pieces, right? A top and a bottom. And we're going to have to figure out some way to be able to allow this object to be treated as one element. Okay. Now, when we were working with Grasshopper and just a single surface, it's really quite easy to see how we're able to take this and really, start to subdivide it pretty quickly using our Weaverbird component. However, whenever we start to want to go a little bit further and develop something a little bit more interesting, a little bit more kind of unique, you have to do a little bit more work whenever you're building this out. So see what that involves in just one second. Now,